I knew that. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Very half-term feel for some of us. For some of you, half-term means nothing whatsoever. But if you've got kids at school, it means a lot. I'm picking up a bit of a half-term vibe this morning. Why do I say that? Well, some of us have been relaxing this week. Some people have been changing the colour of their hair, things like that, all sorts going on. I'm going to do a very brief introduction to a subject that I really believe is going to be of huge relevance to all of us this week. I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. I'm then going to show a very short video. So that's got to be good, right? You haven't just got to listen to me being boring for half an hour. I'm going to show a short video. Then you're going to get the chance to talk to your neighbour for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to just throw a whole load of info at you. Then you're going to have a chance to discuss it at the end. Then we're going to pray. Okay, so that's the plan for this morning. So we have the first slide up, please. We have rather ambitiously undertaken the task as a church of going through the Bible in 7 weeks. We've actually we've duplicated the wisdom bit to run for 2 weeks because of half term, and not everyone's around both weeks. Last week, if you were here, you will have heard Luis giving a bit of an introduction to Ecclesiastes and to Job. They're 2 of the books that are part of the wisdom material in the Bible. If you were to hold on to a Bible, go into the middle of the Bible, chances are you come to all that wisdom material in the middle. Today, we're thinking about Proverbs. I'm going to leave you to go away and read Song of Songs for yourself and Psalms, because they come under the wisdom material as well. Today we're going to look at Proverbs. And what I'm going to be saying, what we've tried to do with this series, if you listen to the Bible Project, they talk a lot about how they see the Bible as a unified story that points to Jesus. And we agree with that. So as we're undertaking this task of looking at the whole Bible, we're coming at it from the standpoint of how do we see Jesus? Because Jesus is wonderful, isn't he? Don't you want to see more of Jesus? Don't you want to understand him more? Don't you want to get to know him more? Well, the whole of the Bible points to him. And today, we're going to be thinking about wisdom, and we're going to be thinking about how Jesus is wisdom. So in the wisdom books, we see that Jesus is wisdom. We're going to think a little bit more what that means, what wisdom means, and we're going to see that it's really relevant. It's not just someone with a white beard in a university somewhere writing some very niche bit of academic treatise. It's something that's really got relevance to the minutiae of our daily lives. So in the wisdom books, we've got Job, we've got Psalms, we've got Proverbs, we've got Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. And today we're thinking about Proverbs. And what we're going to be thinking about today is really how the wisdom that Proverbs presents is a wisdom that helps us to be relational, that helps us to undertake good relationships. So, without further ado, let's play the video, which is an introduction from the Bible Project to the book of Proverbs. Got some nice artwork going on. It's going to tell the story. Then I'm going to give you a discussion question to discuss with your neighbour. Would you mind, Gus, just turning off the light behind you? Maybe John, you could reach over to that light, and then we'll be able to see the video a bit more clearly.
There are 3 books in the Bible that have come to be called the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job.
And all of these books are addressing the same set of questions. What kind of world are we living in? And what does it look like to live well in this world?
So, how to be good at life.
Yeah. So each of these books tackles these questions from a unique perspective, and it's important to understand all of them to get a fully biblical perspective on the good life. So as a thought experiment, you could actually imagine each of these books as a person. So Proverbs would be like this brilliant young teacher, and Ecclesiastes the sharp, middle-aged critic, and Job would be this weathered old man who's seen a lot in his day.
We're going to start by meeting the book of Proverbs, the brilliant young teacher. And she's not just smart, she's smart about everything: work, relationships, sex, spirituality. She has incredible insights, things you wouldn't see on your own.
Yeah, she would be the perfect friend to have around when you need really specific advice.
So what makes her so smart?
Well, Proverbs can see things that most people don't see. She believes that there's an invisible creative force in the universe that can guide people in how they should live. And you can't see it, just like you can't see gravity, but it affects everything that we do.
So what's this force?
Well, in Hebrew, it's called chokhmah, and it usually gets translated into English as wisdom. It's an attribute of God that God used to create the world. And chokhmah has been woven into the fabric of things and how they work. So wherever people are making good or just or wise decisions, they're tapping into chokhmah.
And whenever someone's making a bad decision, they're working against Hokmah.
Right, or as it says in Proverbs chapter 1, the waywardness of fools will destroy them, but the one who listens to wisdom lives in security.
So it's like a moral law of the universe.
Yeah, it's a cause-effect pattern, and no one can escape it. And Proverbs personifies all of this as a woman.
Yeah, Lady Wisdom.
Right, and she roams around the earth, calling out, making herself available to anyone who's willing to listen to her and to learn. Which leads to the second thing Proverbs believes, that anyone can access and interact with wisdom and use it to make a beautiful life for yourself or for others.
You can create with it like a designer.
Yes, in fact, chokhmah in Hebrew isn't simply intellectual knowledge. The word is also used to describe a skilled artisan who excels at their craft, like woodworking or stonemasonry. So you show you possess chokhmah when you put it to work and develop the skill of making a good life.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's do this. Let's go find some wisdom.
But before you do, Proverbs has one more really important thing to consider. Chokhmah isn't some impersonal force. It's an attribute of God himself. And so in Hebrew thought, your journey to becoming wise has to begin with what Proverbs calls the fear of the Lord. It's this healthy respect for God's definition of good and evil. And true wisdom means learning those boundary lines and not crossing them.
Now, all those ideas you just unpacked are in chapters 1 through 9 in Proverbs. But when I think of the book of Proverbs, I think of the collection of sayings, the Proverbs themselves. Tell me about those.
Yeah, those are what you find in chapters 10 on to the end of the book. It's a collection of hundreds and hundreds of proverbs about any and all aspects of life. And chokhmah gets applied to them, resulting in this wise guidance to help you find a path towards success, and no matter what you do.
If I design my life with these sayings, life is going to be good.
Yeah, or as Proverbs puts it, it'll give health to your bones, prosperity, a long, rich life.
Which is a really big claim.
But you can see how it's often the case. Wise people, they tend to do better. Things usually work out well for them in life. And so that is the promise and the wisdom of the book of Proverbs.
The book of Proverbs is really beautiful. But if we take a step back, some people would argue it's a little too simplistic. Because sometimes horrible things happen to really wise people, and sometimes foolish people get rewarded. It doesn't always work the way we think it should work.
That's right. Which is why we need to go and listen to our next wise friend, Ecclesiastes the critic. Because he's
Okay, that was what we did last week, so we're doing this in reverse. I want you to, if we could have the slides back up, turn to your neighbour now. Before we go any further, I just want you to share how you feel you most need wisdom this week. How do you need God to help you to be wise this week? Is there something that you're facing this week that you need wisdom from? If you get time, you can pray for each other, but I'm only going to give you 5 minutes, and we're going to come back together. We're going to think a little bit more about Proverbs and wisdom. Who's wondering that? Just turn to your neighbour. All right, let's do one more minute. One more minute. All right, let's come back together, and I'm going to let's just wrap that up with a prayer. That little bit, Lord, help us this week. What we've been sharing with one another, help us to have your wisdom this week. What I'm going to do with the remaining time that we've got this afternoon rather, is just throw out just a few thoughts, which hopefully are going to be a seed of thought, which maybe during this week, maybe you want to read through Proverbs 8, maybe you want to think and reflect on this a little bit more. I think these questions are related specifically to the type of material that we have in the wisdom literature and in Proverbs in particular. Is it possible to grow emotional intelligence? That's a kind of fancy way, I guess, of saying it's possible to get better at relationships. And let's face it, we all sometimes find relationships difficult. And if we're honest, we all sometimes are frustrated with ourselves that we don't conduct our relationships better, or that we don't have the right thing to say to someone, or that emotionally we get worked up about things. Is it possible actually to develop that, to grow that, or is that just a given that some people have, some people don't, and we just have to learn to live with it? Secondly, how does Proverbs want to help us? How does it offer to help us? And then thirdly, how might that actually affect us this week? How might that help us to do this week maybe just a little bit better? So I'm going to just break this 10 minutes down into what, why, and how. What is wisdom? Why is it important? And how can we move towards it? So let's start by thinking about wisdom. Wisdom is relational. If we think about the chapter that we read a few verses from, it promises to bless both the individual and the community that they're part of. So the individual gets addressed by Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 8. And Lady Wisdom says, "To you, O people, I call out." Verse 4, "I raise my voice to all mankind. To you who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, set your hearts on it." And it goes on to talk about how what is on offer is more valuable than silver, than choice gold, than rubies, and nothing else you desire can compare with it. Verse 10 and 11. So wisdom is promising to bless the individual. But we can't get away from the fact as well that wisdom is going to bless the community that that individual is part of. Verses 12 to 21 go on to talk about how through wisdom kings reign, rulers issue decrees that are just, princes govern, nobles rule the earth. And it starts to take on a bigger kind of national perspective on wisdom. Wisdom bestows a rich inheritance, it says in verse 21, to those who love her, and it makes their treasuries full. We could also think about how wisdom is, the setting of wisdom is relational. The wisdom that we have presented in Proverbs is not just the wisdom of Solomon, although Solomon gets the title. He gets the title because he's the king of Israel. He wrote some of the material. He didn't write all of it. We know that from the inscriptions. This is Israel's wisdom. And it's Israel's wisdom in dialogue with the wisdoms of other ancient Near Eastern peoples. It is a wisdom that in Proverbs takes place in the home. A mother and a father address a young man, and they encourage that young man to move towards wisdom. This is a wisdom that has influence in the workplace, whether you're a king, ruling, governing, whether you're someone working in the fields, working in the marketplace, it can be a blessing to you and make you a blessing to others. And then just a piece of trivia, but I think it's relevant. There's a relational kind of way that Proverbs is presented. Chapters 1 to 9, which get called the introduction. Basically, you've got this attractive figure of Lady Wisdom. She's beautiful. Go after her is the instruction. At the end of Proverbs, we've got the wise wife, which countless women in Christian circles have sat through various talks about the wise wife and what she looks like. It's actually sometimes overlooking the fact it's used as a metaphor. The pursuit of wisdom in first chapters 1 to 9 becomes consummated at the end of all the wisdom material through this marriage. Become intimate with wisdom, join together with wisdom, and all these blessings follow. So, wisdom is relational. Why is this important? Why is it important that we pursue wisdom? Why have you as a church had to sit through countless talks on wisdom? Because Robin's decided it's so great. Well, I think it's important that we pursue wisdom for relationships and help others to do the same. I've phrased it as a question there. Wisdom wants to help us to fulfill our commission as human beings to partner with God for his good purposes in the world, and that involves relationships. Genesis 1 verses 27 and 28, the commission, the Imago Dei commission that God gives to human beings when he creates them. Verse 27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Get married, have kids, fill the earth and subdue it. Work the land, steward the earth, rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Arguably, the rest of Genesis, the rest of Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, is primarily how human beings have really struggled to put that into practice. Think about Genesis, marriages going south, the relationships between family members struggling, the workplace becoming this difficult place that no one really wants to be in. Wisdom is wanting to help us to do this well. And there's a lovely quote from a guy called Derek Kidner, who wrote various commentaries on Bible books. He says this: there are details of character small enough to escape the mesh of the law and the broad sides of the prophets. I love the use of language there. And yet decisive in personal dealings. So Derek Kidner clearly believes that it's going to be helpful for relationships. Details of character, small enough, they can slip through the prophets, but they're absolutely essential for us to pay attention to. And Proverbs wants to help us to pay attention to those things this week. Well, why is that important for us to pay attention to? And indeed, in previous years, not much scholarship was undertaken on the wisdom material because they didn't think it fitted within a narrative of the Bible that was about salvation by grace. There's not a lot of mention of God. It's hard to see that. But understanding what I've said earlier, that actually it's there to help us pursue God's purposes for the world. Well, I think it's really important. There are features, take my word for it, social commentators like Robert Putnam, who wrote an influential book called Bowling Alone about the decline of community in America. He says there's various features of our wider culture that are making it harder for people to be relational. Technology. Instead of people gathering around the kitchen table having their dinner, they're all in different rooms watching TV, having their dinner. Busyness. You've often got two parents both at work and trying to juggle kind of childcare and things like that. You've got the separation, what Putnam calls the siloing of ages. So you put all the teenagers together with other teenagers in this group doing stuff all the time. You put kids in another group. You put the elderly in a group. That's not helping, Robert Putnam says. And then you've got mobility and spread. You've got people with cars being able to travel to different things, to do different things. For us in London, you jump on the underground or you jump on a bus, go and do things in different parts of London. Sometimes that can make having deep relationships with people harder because you're more spread out. Another reason why I think wisdom's really important is that most people nowadays would say young people now have more knowledge at their fingertips than ever before in history. You just think anything you want to know how to do something, you click on YouTube, click on the internet, and you've got information. AI gives you information. However, do they have wisdom? What's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Knowledge is knowledge, but knowing which knowledge is more important than other knowledge, knowing how to apply that knowledge, that takes us into the realms of wisdom. And then lastly, it's important for us as Christians to pay attention to this, I'm arguing, because Christianity and church specifically ask us to relate well to God and others. Do you remember Jesus gets asked, what's the greatest commandment? And do you remember what he says? He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul and strength. Love your neighbour as yourself. All of the prophets, all of Torah hang on these two commandments. But our society is maybe not equipping us to be as relational as it has done in the past. So we're having to learn how to do this. And I feel like as a church leader, one of my reflections has been we're inviting people into community, we're expecting people to participate, but actually we haven't helped them to develop those skills. Proverbs wants to help us, gives us a little bit of a manual, a way forward. So I'm going to throw out just 3 different ways in the remaining 2 minutes how we can actually move towards this. How can we move towards this type of wisdom? How can we develop our emotional intelligence with God helping us so that we can relate better to others? And I'm sure you could come up with some other really good ways of doing it. And maybe over tea and coffee you want to share that with someone else. But here's 3 that I see operating in Proverbs that I'm just going to look at in turn, and then we're going to finish and pray. First one is God motivation. Second one, sharing helpful content. And thirdly, being part of a wise community. And I think all 3 of those we see really clearly operating in the book of Proverbs. So let's think firstly about God motivation. I've drawn it as a virtuous cycle, virtuous circle, where moving towards one good thing actually leads us into another good thing, which leads us back into that first thing, and it just goes on and on. It's beautiful. Seeking Jesus, I see I'm using the word Jesus because we read Proverbs through the New Testament, don't we? Come at it, we see Jesus. And actually in 1 Corinthians 1 verse 23, 24, it says, Paul says, we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. So Paul clearly thought Jesus is wisdom. Seek Jesus, seek God, Proverbs says, and you'll find wisdom. So in other words, don't start out today, this week, by trying to pursue wisdom. Pursue God. Check your passion levels, your zeal for God. Want to know him more, want to be more like Jesus, and that will lead you into wisdom. James 3 verse 17 says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. It's what we find when we come to God. And Proverbs 9 verse 10, just to quote one of the Proverbs, the fear of the Lord, famous verse, the fear of the Lord, revering him, paying attention to how he's made the world, how he instructs us to live in his world, is the beginning of wisdom. And knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. But then we come round to another element, which is seek wisdom, and you find Jesus. Proverbs 2, verse 3 to 5 says this. It says, indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Every time we come away from a relationship, from a time with someone where we're frustrated with ourselves, we don't feel like we did that relationship particularly well, we didn't say the right thing, and we're frustrated with ourselves, actually it leads us back to God. That moment can lead us back to God. God, I need your wisdom. James seems to pick up on this idea. James 1 verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. So motivation, God motivation, is one thing to pay attention to if we want to grow in wisdom, if we want to get better at relationships. Second thing that I had on my list was sharing content, sharing helpful content. What are the algorithms based on, around us? Let's get some good stuff in those algorithms. I believe in this, and it's one of the reasons I'm working with Phil Parnham and his uncle Andy. We're setting up a website and podcast called Relationary. Going to launch it next week to put out helpful content for Christians, for church leaders, for those who just want to be community builders. They want to be good team players. Proverbs does this, and look at some of the topics that it covers in the first collection. Wise work and pay, wise attitudes, wise emotions, wise speech, wise acts towards others, wise learning, having a wise legacy. This is good content that Proverbs is putting out there. If you've got good content, share it with others. And then lastly, Proverbs encourages us to not go it alone, but to be part of a wise community. And actually Israel would take the teenagers who are on the cusp of adulthood and would take them and begin to put their arm around their shoulder and say, look, if you will pay attention to this material, you can be a pillar in our community. You can be someone who strengthens the community of our nation. And church is supposed to be a place, we're not pretending that we're wise and all-knowing. We're not the owls of society. But we are wanting to grow. We value wisdom. We're trying to pursue God together. And what does a wise community look like? Well, you could come up with loads more suggestions. But here's a few of mine. A wise community asks questions together. It's okay to ask questions in church. We want to create that kind of environment where we can ask questions, we can discuss things, pray about things together. Wise community takes time to reflect, seeks God together. It avoids hurrying. It values team. It interprets the world, the good and the bad, and everything in between. And it plays the long game. It's got that perspective. How can you build a really wonderful life that's going to go on actually into eternity? It's going to be a blessing to yourself, be a blessing to others. Okay, I'm going to finish there. That was just a very whirlwind tour through Proverbs, but hopefully it's put out a few seeds of thought. If we'd had a bit more time, I'd have got you to discuss, what you would like a wise community to look like. But I think we've run out of time, really. We'll have to do that another time. So let's just pray, shall we? And let's come back to what we were saying at the beginning. What's that thing that we need God to help us with? Maybe it's a relational issue that is right at the forefront of your mind. Maybe it's something in your workplace, something in your marriage, something in your family, friendship. You really need God to walk with you. You need to know Jesus as wisdom, walking with you hand in hand this week. Let's just reach out and ask God, remembering that wonderful verse in James. James 1 and verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Lord Jesus, we come to you today. We say both as individuals and as a church family, help us to grow in wisdom. Help us to undertake our relationships with you and with others better and better, Lord. Help us to learn from our mistakes. Help us to be of encouragement and cheer to one another. In Jesus' name, amen.